So Larry, we have all this interest in clinical psychology about attachment. So we have this question here from the NARM perspective: how do we translate attachment dynamics into effective clinical work?
Well, I think that that's a very important question, actually, because there's so much significant research that has been developing in the last couple of decades around attachment dynamics. But I think that there has been a lag in how do we translate this understanding into effective clinical interventions. And in NARM, we have 5 adaptive survival styles, which we'll bring up on a slide for the viewers to take a look at. So we have these 5 adaptive styles, and each one of them develops, as you can see on the slide there, as a strategy which is designed to protect the attachment relationship. Now, this is a strategy, of course, that children develop early on in order to protect the attachment relationship. They foreclose or give up on parts of themselves that they experience as either unwelcomed, or they experience as being attacked, or just not supported. There's a whole variety of ways that this happens, but they learn to foreclose or give up parts of themselves in order to be loved, in order to maintain the attachment relationship. And this then focuses or brings into focus these 5 basic survival adaptations, as you can see on the screen, that each one of these survival styles develops around the core theme of the various strategies that they use to protect the attachment relationship. And for a big part of that, that means giving up parts of themselves, as I mentioned. But it also, as we move into adulthood, it has profound implications. This dynamic is going on all of the time in all of us and all of our clients, in the various ways that we narrow our lives, in the expressions that we don't say, in the aspects of ourselves that we don't allow ourselves to get in touch with, is because on the deepest level, of course, at a very primitive level of the brain, there is this profound existential fear that we will lose the attachment relationship if we express whatever it might be for any given survival style. For example, if you look at Autonomy, we see that they grew up in families, Autonomy survival style people tend to grow up in families where authentic expression is not acceptable, or sometimes even attacked or undermined in various ways. So they give up direct expressions of independence in order not to feel abandoned or crushed. So these are individuals who have difficulty saying no, who have difficulty setting limits. And, if you just focus on behavioral dynamics, trying to get people to be, like assertiveness training or that kind of thing, it's ignoring the whole underlying psychodynamic of the fear of the loss of the attachment relationship if they set limits. And this same style, or the same pattern, better said, the same pattern is through all of the adaptive survival styles. And so it's really important for us as clinicians to be aware of this underlying basic component that is present there in all of the survival styles, which means it's present there for all of us in different ways, in different degrees, and how to work with it. And that's what we teach in NARM.
So an example might be with the Autonomy survival style, if someone is having an inordinate amount of anxiety or fear about asking their boss for time off or for a raise, that energy could go all the way back to that early adaptation that had to happen during childhood.
Yeah, in particular situations like you described, where there's an actual kind of dependency on the boss, because after all, your job may be dependent upon his or her, feelings towards you. Those kinds of situations get particularly tricky because there's a practical application, but it's very hard for people, excuse me, to know how much of that is really acting out old strategies to protect the attachment relationship, and how much of that is objective in a given situation. It's easier to look at it in terms of relationships when clients, or when any of us allow ourselves to be doormats. We don't stand up for ourselves. We don't say no. As adults, we don't have that same kind of actual dependency that we did as children, or that we do in some work situations. So that's why I think it's important to understand the difference between those two areas of life.
Yeah, and it would make sense then how complex this gets very quickly.
It does, and for the most part, it's unconscious. People have no idea that really at the base of so much avoidance behavior, at the base of so much suffering, is this unconscious desire to hold on to the attachment relationship. And this, of course, gets transferred to other people, to our current partners, or to work situations, as you brought up. But it continues to, the way we respond to this pattern continues to affect our lives profoundly as adults.
So in a short little video like this, we can't go into all the clinical skills and approach from NARM about how to work with that. But can we give folks just a little bit of a flavor for how we might work? If we just kind of stay with this autonomy example, and how we might work with the fear of attachment loss that comes up.
Well, one of the things that is very central to my teaching, to the NARM teaching, is that we're never trying to get people into feelings. Instead, for example, and I see that a lot of therapists end up trying to be cheerleaders, and they have the best intentions for clients to stand up for themselves. But when they do that, they miss the fear. And in NARM and in my personal work, we tend to focus on what would be, what's, for example, is so threatening for you to say no. What is the worst thing that you can imagine might happen? And then we start to bring, because all of these ideas and strategies that people have to protect the attachment relationship are really coming from a child consciousness.
Yeah.
So we use that to bring the child consciousness into focus, so that the more adult parts of ourselves can have a more realistic relationship to the world.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Brad.